Okay, it is preparing this thing.
Hey, Zach.
Yep.
Did you want me to monitor Facebook for any questions?
Yes, thank you.
I'll put them in the chat. I'll dump them in the chat.
Okay, we are up and running.
Can you tell how many people are connected on the Facebook?
2 people currently.
Okay.
We're live, Mike.
All right. Then we can go now. Welcome everybody, and welcome back to everybody else who had been here last night, the night before last Thursday. We are doing one more town meeting here now with the member of Assembly, John McDonald. Most of you have heard this already. I'll let anybody else who's joining us tonight catch up. Who are we? We are the Disability Caucus of the Albany County Democratic Committee. And why are we here? Well, when it comes to voting and electioning and democracy, disabled people here in America and locally in Albany County need to have a voice. We like to get as many people as we can to be informed so that they can sign up to vote, register, and be counted on election day and in primary day to influence the Democratic Party locally here. And also, if they want to join the committee, we need to have our voices represented on the committee. And also, we can also encourage and assist people who are disabled to run for public office so that we're not dropping everything every year at budget time to run to our elected officials to ask them what we need or tell them what we need when we can actually be elected ourselves and actually put together the bills and the proposals that might be turned into public policy, put our words into actions and deeds and accomplishments. We'd like to get as many people out there as we can. So let's move on to the next thing. And Zach, can you say the next part, please?
Thanks, Mike. First of all, thank you, Assemblymember McDonald, for joining us tonight, and Chairman Flynn and everyone else who has been so supportive in working with us to build the disability vote and empower community members with disabilities to be full and active participants. So we're really making a concerted effort to get people with disabilities registered to vote, educated about the issues, and then casting their ballots to be full and active participants. I just want to say a quick thing about a poll that stuck out to me. Rutgers University, beginning of 2020, they identified 35 million eligible voters with disabilities. And that figure jumps to over 62 million eligible voters when you count family members in the same household. And in 2016, only 16 million of those people with disabilities voted in the November 2016 elections. And that's lower than, that was 6% lower than, the general turnout. So we have a lot of work to do, and there is a lot of momentum, when candidates capitalize on the disability community and it turns into smart policy decisions. So, I think it'd be negligent of me not to say anything about COVID-19 and its devastating impact on people with disabilities, older adults, people with compromised immune systems. Beginning of June, over 1,700,000 people across the United States had been diagnosed with COVID-19, and at that point in time, over 115,000 deaths. And again, that disproportionately impacts our community. And so preserving the health of the disability community, that remains a top concern for us. And so, the caucus wants to extend an invitation, to people who are watching this, organizations who work with people with disabilities and other marginalized communities, and candidates themselves to work with you to help mobilize the vote, but also while, preserving the sanctity of life so that, we can make sure that few people are, harmed from this. And this is also a reason why it's so important during the COVID-19 crisis to empower people with disabilities, because now more than ever, our community's voice needs to be represented as we choose the leaders who are going to guide our city, county, state, and national response. So, and I say this recognizing that the fight for disability justice is basically, we can't win that fight unless we get social justice. And so we have this knowing full well that our struggle is interconnected to everything else that's going on. So only when we begin to empower and uplift our communities, will there be a solution. So I want to turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zach. So tonight, our guest here is Member of Assembly John McDonald, representing the 108th District in Cohoes, Waterville, downtown Albany, Troy, and Rensselaer. So Melanie is going to be our moderator again tonight. Thanks, Melanie, and she will ask you the questions. And we will also have some opportunity for people on Zoom to use the chat on the bottom of the screen, and on Facebook to leave their questions in the comments. And so take it away, Melanie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, hello everyone. My name is Melanie Hecker. I'm a Master of Public Administration student at the University at Albany, and I will be moderating our town hall tonight. And we're going to start off with the topic of community integration. The vast majority of Americans with disabilities and older Americans prefer home and community-based services that allow them to live independently in their communities. However, states and insurance providers of long-term services and supports, or LTSS for short, still restrict access to community-based services. Without these services, people with disabilities may end up in institutions that deprive them of their fundamental freedoms and cut their lives short. This reliance on institutional placement is also far more expensive than prioritizing services in the community. We are experiencing a critical shortage of community attendance to provide services to seniors and people with disabilities who are living in their homes. So my first question is, what steps would you take to alleviate such a crisis?
So thank you, Melanie, and thanks to everybody for the opportunity to converse this evening for a little bit. In regards to your first question, it is true. I mean, and as you may know, I'm a pharmacist. I've worked with many organizations serving the disabled, mental health, behavioral health for the last 30, 40 years. I have seen programs where individuals started off who came out of facilities, went right into the community, and now have gone from being individuals who rarely communicated to being very active in the political process, My friend Shamika Andrews is one of them I speak about. I've known her for years. She's been a patient of ours for years, and she's been a very strong advocate, and she knows how to dance with that damn wheelchair she's got. Anyways, there's a lot of different things we have been doing and we can do better. Obviously, for those who might need some more assistance, funding we have provided for housing, new housing construction, ADA compliant, modern ventilation, and ventilation is very critical. I think COVID-19 has proven that more than ever before, because we know that the virus does not live in a relative humidity of 40 to 60%. And if you look at what's happening in nursing homes and which happened in other facilities where the COVID-19 was very vibrant, it was in areas that are extremely dry or extremely humid. So we need to make sure there's a proper newer construction, there's a proper humidity controls, so people can live healthy lives. At the same token, we need to really shore up the workforce. And this is a tough time right now. We've had tough times before. We will get through it. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. But we need to focus on training. Well, I guess it's recruitment, training, and placement of individuals to work with those who live independently with disabilities. Now, I know, and for the last 2 years, we've struggled with the consumer-directed care program, which I'm a big fan of. That program has grown dramatically, as you know, from $450 million 5 years ago to $1.9 billion this past year. And we've made some changes, mostly trying to gear it at the MLTC programs, which are responsible for the oversight. We've looked a little bit at the eligibility criteria in regards to look-back period. Instead of being, I think it was 30 days for look-back period, people now have 2.5 months. But the reality is, the fear and concern is that individuals who have been living independently are going to have a hard time finding people to work. So we need to, one, educate, two, incentivize. There are still, pre-COVID, there were still many populations, at least in my district, particularly in the minority community, that were suffering from high unemployment. Now that unemployment is 12.7 or 14.9% here in the capital region, we have a lot of people who are going to be looking for work. And as much as, this may not be what they intended, there's an opportunity to get back to work and to provide care for individuals who actually will appreciate it. And there's a difference sometimes.
Thank you very much. And of course, COVID-19 has changed up a lot of the game lately, which leads into the next question. Disabled people frequently must live in institutional settings because of the lack of accessible housing, the institutional bias of Medicaid, and the attendant worker shortage. At the same time, nursing facilities have been granted immunity by New York from claims of negligence in preparing for and responding to COVID-19. Do you support nursing facility immunity from liability, and why?
So I think we really need to focus on the term of negligence. Negligence is a willful intent to cause harm. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a pharmacist. My colleague Phil Steck could probably answer the question much better in regards to negligence. I understand why the governor issued the emergency order to provide that immunity. I don't think it was ill-intended. I think just like many of the other more than 100 or 200 executive orders, the intent of the executive order was to allow individuals to care for people under a crisis. So I think the intention was good. That being said, I'm going to reserve judgment until we have our legislative investigation on this waiving of immunity, because I think we need to get our facts. We need to get our facts straight. As you may know, I'm chairperson of the investigations committee in the New York State Assembly. Myself, Dick Godfrey, the health chair, and Harry Bronson, the aging chair, have been requested to conduct a hearing on what's happening in nursing homes. And it is our intention to do it. The thing is, it's hard to do it during a crisis. So we are waiting till this crisis subsides a little bit so we can get the full attention of the Department of Health and whoever else we need to do. So I understand why the immunity was granted. I don't think it should be permanent by any stretch of the imagination. But in regards to this emergency, I think it was well-intentioned and warranted.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And with that, we are now going to turn our attention to the topic of criminal justice. People with disabilities are more likely than non-disabled people to be the victims of crime. From 2011 to 2015, the rate of violent victimization against people with disabilities was at least 2.5 times the rate for those without disabilities, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities experience sexual assault at much higher rates than the rest of the population and are often targeted specifically because of their disabilities. What steps will you take to address the sexual assault of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
So I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I knew this. This is why these forums are helpful, to make sure that we understand it. Don't get me wrong, I've heard of, primarily through my workings with the Justice Center, of staff assaulting. So I don't know if your question relates to staff assaults or general public assaults. Obviously, regardless, we're all the same. We all should have the same level playing field when it comes to justice in regards to these situations. We also should have proper protections in place. I would probably work, we have a disabilities task force, as you know. Phil Steck, who's our Capital Region colleague, is the chair of that task force. And I would work through his committee to see what else we could do in regards to providing the proper safeguards, the proper education, the proper awareness. And I think this is where awareness needs to be built up, not only with law enforcement, because they're there to protect, but also caseworkers, program managers, the whole nine yards, individuals who will be coming in contact with those with disabilities, that there's a greater awareness. You know, we require teachers to be reporters because they know their population of students. They know when things are changed or different. And I think what we should be doing is to educate a larger community to understand it. And that would go for healthcare professionals, including people like pharmacists. And we interact with people a lot. I can tell when you're not having a good day. I can tell when something's bothering you or is having an impact. And I think that's important from that perspective. But I also want to make sure that if somebody does commit these heinous crimes, that the level of penalty is at the same level as anybody else. Because I think that may be an issue that I'm not aware of, but if it is, we need to address it.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. On to our next question. How will you ensure that law enforcement is trained to appropriately interact with disabled citizens, including people who may be nonverbal, who use a communication device, or who are deaf, to prevent unnecessary incarcerations and injuries?
So the simple question is training. The real answer, though, is experience. You know, as you know, before I came to the Assembly, I served as mayor of the city of Cohoes for 13 years. And during this whole time in office, I've also worked in the community as a pharmacist at my pharmacy. So I get to know a lot of people. I see people in the streets outside the pharmacy. I see people in the streets outside of City Hall. I'll never forget back in 2003, I was between meetings and I was coming back to the city of Cohoes. I saw one of my patients from the pharmacy who I knew. He had behavioral health issues, but he was a good person. No problem. But he had a very difficult time expressing himself. And he was pulled over by an officer. And the officer had him out, didn't touch him. But the officer was yelling and screaming at him. Like, don't you know what I'm saying? What's wrong with you? I've had situations with individuals who had Asperger's who got pulled over, and because of the Asperger's and where they were in the spectrum, they were hesitant to interact with a law enforcement officer. It wasn't as if they were hiding anything or trying to avoid it. They were just non-social. They did not want to interact. And same token, I understand where the officers come from. They pull a person over and they're looking in a car, person starts acting strange. They have to think about what could happen and what's going on. And my point is, this in the 2003 case I talked about, I went back and said to the chief, I saw it. I went to the chief. I said, I know that officer's a good person, and that's not his intention, but we can't do this. We have to give greater training for dealing with individuals, behavioral health issues, developmental disabilities, mental health, because all you're going to do is exacerbate or escalate a situation that actually, if conversation was going on, it could be de-escalated, and whatever the issue is could be resolved much more peacefully. And I think that's really what continued. That was something that I was very big bug about. I used to spend a lot of money on overtime and training for officers because I felt if not for that, number one, we're treating people wrong. Number two, you're putting the city in a libelous position. And therefore, that's something I've always believed in. It's something I always did my 13 years as mayor. I can't speak for what happened after I left, but it's something I think all departments need to do a reevaluation of. And as you know, with everything going on with the inappropriate death of George Floyd and many other individuals who've come before him and after him, sadly, law enforcement is going to be required to take a much larger look at their operations and change their style, change their policing methods. And sadly, it's long overdue.
Thank you very much. Continuing with the topic of criminal justice, the New York State Legislature recently passed the STAT Act, which seeks to collect demographic data on people who die in so-called arrest-related deaths. The data collected includes age, race, and sex, but not disability. Would you support expanding the law to require police departments to collect data on the number of disabled people who die arrest-related deaths?
Yes. But pretty simple answer there, yes. I don't know why they were excluded. I think it would be very educational. Data is critical, particularly when you collect it. So, yes.
Assemblymember, do you think that this bill will be revised at some point?
I will be. Well, actually, I was very pleased that the governor signed it because I didn't think he would. I will be talking to Joe Lenthal, who is the sponsor of that bill, and see if there's an opportunity to review that. I'm sure. I know Phil Steck, I think, was on before. He was on last week, I think, or beginning of this week, and I'm sure Phil, as chair of the Disabilities Task Force, will also be all over it. Yes, absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Assemblymember. Our next question. How would you direct resources to support people with disabilities and deaf people who experience sexual and/or domestic violence?
That's an interesting question from my perspective, because the reality is, I think what we would need to do is provide additional support and training for many of the organizations that currently exist in our region. I think immediately of Unity House and Equinox, two great organizations that support individuals who are victims of domestic violence or sexual violence. And therefore, what I would be doing is focusing on making sure that there's additional training to educate and make them aware of individuals with disabilities who struggle, as we've talked about earlier, through the same experience, and to make sure that they've got a set aside of individuals who, or at least make it part of their compulsory training, which I think is the first step.
And Unity House and Equinox are great resources. Thank you very much, Assemblymember.
So, it comes with no surprise that there are multiple conflicting, very important priorities. How would you be able to, at this point, maybe work this into additional reform packages or?
To be honest with you, my first action will be to talk to the leaders of Equinox and Unity House to say, okay, are you guys doing any of this? Are you involved with this? Where can we work through this? I mean, interestingly enough, the governor just appointed a task force on domestic violence. They're coming back with, I don't know if they've come back with the report yet, or they will be shortly. So it may not be too late. And that's something that I know my staff, somebody on my staff is probably taking copious notes on this as we're on Facebook Live, to see if we can somehow get that part of the task force. If not, then we work through the proper committees within our legislature. Although I am now, I'm in my 4th term, my 8th year, hopefully will be in my 5th term, my 10th year, by the end of the year. I would work through the proper chairs and work to the proper seniority. I mean, there are many members, as you know, that are much more long tenured that take leadership roles on these particular issues. So I would work with them. I'm not one of I have to have every bill known to mankind. I try to work within my zones, but when it comes to issues that are brought to my attention, I work with my colleagues because it's happening in the capital region or all the country. It's probably happening.
In addition to, so you're talking about like navigating the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So for people who might be watching this who aren't aware, so you're chair of the oversight analysis
investigation. Yeah.
And then do you also hold another leadership position within the assembly?
That's it. I was on the steering committee, which steering committee would actually, I was vice chair of the steering committee. Steering committee would get on specifically assigned efforts of the speaker, but this probably would not fall into this category too much, I would think. This is something where, Amy Poland, who literally sits right in front of me, is something she would pick up and champion, like right away. I'd also work with the Women's Caucus because not that sexual violence can't happen to males, but it primarily happens to females. And I think the Women's Caucus would take a very long look at this as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure people are understanding, like, the process and delegating and that kind of stuff.
The process is there to be followed. As we might know, sometimes it's not always followed, but that's the process.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember. So our next question is, what steps would you take to address the overwhelming school-to-prison pipeline for students with disabilities?
That's not a one-size-fits-all answer, I'll be honest with you. One of the best ways to address the school-to-prison pipeline for any student, with or without disabilities, is to make sure that there are programs in place within the school education curriculum for those individuals who may not be benefiting from the education that they're receiving. As you know, there are people who do very well in school, love it, ace everything, move on with their life. There are individuals, for whatever reason, maybe it's the adverse childhood experiences they had growing up, maybe it's the environment they're currently living in, that they're just not able to concentrate and apply. But at the end of the day, everybody has some special talent. It's a matter of finding opportunities outside of the education system, or bring them within the education system. So I would look to build on or expand on programs that would appeal to individuals, because the reality is why people commit crimes. Now, there is a small percentage of individuals that commit crimes just because they're evil and violent people, right? That happens. And those I don't think we can always do too much about, to be clear. But for those individuals who are lost and at the same token need to survive, they resort to other things. They resort to selling drugs. They resort to stealing. It's not something we condone. It's something I understand. At the end of the day, I remember Willie White from the south end of Albany saying, "Do you know why the guy stole a ham? He stole a ham because he had to feed his family." And at the end of the day, unfortunately, that does happen. So I think we need to, early on, and I'm talking middle school, introduce more programs and alternatives for individuals to really get them focused on being college or career ready. And in this situation, probably more career than college. But I think that's an important aspect. You know, one of the things that's been coming up lately, I'm going to digress for a second, but it's important. You know, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement of recent, although it's been really moving for a long period of time, but recently we're at fever pitch. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of struggle about, you know, hiring police and fire in communities and to have representatives of that community be part of it. In other words, if a minority community is 30% of the population, the police and fire department should reflect that. You know, part of the problem is most people don't understand the civil service system. Maybe individuals with disabilities might, because there's a 55B program, but most people don't understand that in order to qualify to be even considered to be in certain fields, police, fire, many other areas, you need to actually sign up to take a test with civil service. You need to perform on that test, and you need to score well to be even considered. I know this for a fact because I used to deal with this as mayor. Many individuals, no matter how much you try to do, you try to go out to the community, you post it conspicuously, people just don't sign up. Why we're not saying to kids, and you talk to every kid who's in 7th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a police officer. I want to be a firefighter. That's what you always hear. We should, when they answer that question, say, well, here, by the way, someday down the road, you need to understand, here's the civil service process. If you really want to do that, here's what you need to do. I'm sorry I digress, but it gets back to the point of providing the resources at an early age to get people in a position to win.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. Those are indeed some very needed resources.
Can I follow up on that, Melanie?
Yes.
So, you know, you were mayor of Cohoes for a number of years, and you referenced like early intervention programs, getting at kids, you know, maybe as early as middle school. Was there anything that you saw in Cohoes that could be a model for elsewhere?
My efforts during my years as mayor, so it's 2000, 2012, were actually during the, oh my God, I'm going to forget the name of the program now, Safe Schools Act. So I spent a lot of time on character education, focusing on, the 6 pillars of character. That's where we actually made great strides because it complemented the statewide initiative of the Safe Schools program that actually was during the Pataki. And I remember Mary Donahue being in Cohoes many times going over it. So that's probably an example of where government, local government, you get more involved in the school system. The truth of the matter is that in the state perspective, we have the ability to have an impact on curriculum and curriculum development. Now, we have to be mindful of this. There's 1,000 different things, people want certain things changed in the education system. And at the same token, we have a lot on our plate, but I think it's a matter of focusing on priorities. I know that here in the capital region, particularly in Albany, I am on at the request of the Albany Housing Authority, I'm on the advisory board for the Capital South Campus Center program, which is now being administered by Capital Region BOCES. We had a board meeting today for about an hour and a half. We meet, it's myself, the mayor, Kelly Kimbrough, for the council member, Steve Longo, the soon-to-be former director as he's retiring, Chiquita, his deputy, Joanne Morton, a longtime resident of Albany. And we focus on what programs we can bring into, mostly to deal with those individuals right out of school. So in other words, people who may not have graduated, people who are looking to get their GED or HSE as it's called, but we've also been bringing other technical programs. My first year in office, they wanted to create an Attain lab, which is a technology lab. And I was able to secure $50,000 to get that off the ground. And it still continues today, where individuals who are learning the simple things of Microsoft Word, how do you send an email, Microsoft Excel, those programs are open to adult learners. And adult learners can be those young individuals who could go either way. They need to have some skills. It could be training programs, whether it's the OSHA certification program. There's a lot of different things that can be done. So that's a good example, Zach, of things I've been involved with. Admittedly, they're not sexy. They don't get a lot of attention. It's all good, right? Usually all we hear about is things that are extreme or bad. This is good stuff. And, at the end of the day, it's making a difference in someone's life.
Right. Well, maybe that can be, that safe schools can be dusted off and, relooked at, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On to our next question. How would you ensure that prisoners with disabilities are fully accounted for and provided with appropriate accommodations? For instance, sign language for deaf prisoners or access to telecommunications relay services formatting external phone calls.
So these kind of questions always surprise me because I would think that the American with Disabilities Act would apply to prisons just as like it would apply to anything else. I guess what you're telling me is it doesn't? Or do we have a high preponderance of individuals who are claiming that they're not being given the proper accommodations?
That's what we're hearing, yes.
Yeah. I would need to know more about that to precisely answer the question. I'm not trying to duck it, but the reality is, what is it? Is it is it a lack of recognition at the time of sentencing from the court system? Is it a lack of appropriate recognition by the defender, whether it's the private counsel or public defender, when a case is going through the process, the judge not getting it? Or is it a improper intake procedure when an individual comes to a jail or a corrections facility? So I would need it. That's very interesting to me. That's actually bothersome. Obviously they should have the proper accommodations based on their disability. Just because maybe they've committed a crime, maybe they're going to have to serve some time in the correction system, doesn't mean that they forfeit their other rights, from my perspective.
Well, the ADA exists. The ADA exists, and it applies to every government program or service, including prisons. But most people who are not disabled, since it doesn't mean anything personally to them, and they just don't bother paying attention. The ADA was written kind of like a how-to manual, but if nobody is complying, then they just didn't bother to read it.
Yeah, so what we hear about a lot in the disability community is the deaf population who end up in prison. And you might get corrections officers who don't know that they're deaf, and they interpret it as non-compliance, the non-response. So some places
you can see
put up,
right?
like, what was that?
I'm reading Zach's comments here, or this comment has been shared. You could see where they'd be non-responsive, which would actually it would not enhance your time in prison. Let's put it that way. If a corrections officer is perceiving you as being non-cooperative, that's not going to win you any favors. That's an interesting thing, and something that I've already taken notes on to follow up, among other things.
This is
Zach,
Katie. Can I add an additional comment to that?
Okay.
Yes, Katie?
Okay, thanks. So I wanted to highlight the role of technology in providing accommodation, and especially when it comes to deaf individuals. There's this, they're almost like two trends, or there are like two things going on, kind of like a lack of interest or proactive work to ensure that the infrastructure is there. So the way that deaf individuals have communicated over time has changed with changes in technology. So there's that. And then I wanted to mention I believe every prisoner in the state prisons not too long ago was given access to a proprietary tablet, which helps streamline some of the services that they are supposed to have access to communication, email, things like that. And that could be a very good thing, but if you don't take accessibility into account, it's quite possible that those tablets that the state acquired, may not have the video relay service capability on them, or there's no information about it, things like that.
Okay. Makes sense. Not good, but makes sense.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember. And you already have touched on this in the context of schools, but I'm also going to ask more generally, would you support diversion programs to move people with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges from the criminal legal system into treatment and support services in the community?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I think that's really going to be part of the centerpiece of criminal justice reform when it comes to law enforcement. And, we've been there, done that. I'm sure Pat mentioned it last night. I'll support it because she led the bill because she's the Albany representative more than I am. She's got more of Albany than I do. But one of the bills that, and I'm very familiar with the program, which is asset forfeiture. Law enforcement gets a lot of money based on asset forfeiture on arrests that they make in their community. And it's in partnership with the federal government. But I used to always question what law enforcement did with the funds. And a lot of times they'd buy equipment, they buy bigger guns, they buy all these other things. We put through legislation, Pat was the lead sponsor, I was the co, and George Amador was the sponsor in the Senate, that basically, what it did is allowed the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, which the City of Albany has proudly put into place, to actually access resources from the Asset Forfeiture Fund to build relationships with many of our strong and critical nonprofits in our community for individuals with behavioral issues and development disabled issues. It makes perfect sense. There's nothing to be gained with somebody who's struggling through a mental health crisis to rough them up and throw them in jail. There's nothing to be gained there. Nothing at all. All it does is just bring out even further post-traumatic stresses, and it just doesn't make sense. So yes, to answer your question, I would.
And that also answers my next question, which was, do you support law enforcement assisted diversion? The answer here seems to be yes.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So next, would you endorse peer support programs?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
No, I know. Yeah, I've actually, periodically the speaker will allot small sums of money for what's called priority projects. And a good example of my early years is programs such as with Addictions Care Center of Albany. Keith Stack, who's the executive director, reached out and said, I need money we think peer support when it comes to the opioid crisis makes a big difference. I said, well, it does make a difference because it makes a difference in behavioral health issues overall. And we've been able to support money. So I've not only endorsed it, I've actually supported those programs, and they've actually been part of our overall opioid task force response as well.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember. And with that, we are going to wrap up the topic of criminal justice and move our attention to the topic of education. Due to the enactment and implementation of a key civil rights law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, high school graduation rates for people with disabilities have increased 45% since 1995, with an associated decrease in dropout rates. Similarly, enrollment in college has doubled for students with disabilities. Nevertheless, local school districts struggle to serve students with disabilities, and those seeking higher education continue to face enormous barriers to success. What steps will you take to ensure that the education system meets the needs of all children, including those with disabilities?
So that's an interesting question because you basically started off talking about the success that has been happening over the past several years. And to be honest with you, the success is usually best gotten by providing more financial resources to school districts to do early interventions and to provide supports for students throughout that program. And I could talk for hours on where we're going to go with this one because I think of some of the many nonprofit programs that actually educate students who are not able to be successful in the classroom, but are successful to be there in the programs. And what we need to do is find a way to support the faculty and teachers of those groups with a living wage because they're pretty much paid minimum wage. So that's something that we have been focusing on and pushing. In regards to barriers of higher education, that's always a challenging thing. Overall, with education, I am not the largest fan of the Excelsior program, which the governor has championed, and it's not a bad program. But the reality is it doesn't get to the core root of the issue when it comes to higher education, which is we need to try to find other funding or build on the success of the TAP program and deal with the TAP gap, which is having a tremendous impact on college. And the other thing is, and I've always been just blown away by these inordinate interest rates that go on college student loans. I've always been a fan of buying down 2 or 3 percentage points to make college that much more affordable, because I think the affordability is a large barrier, plain and simple. Yeah, it starts early. The sooner a student is given the opportunity to grow in a learning environment, the sooner they are going to have a chance to advance and basically be available for be eligible for merit-based scholarships, which is another way to reduce barriers as well.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember.
I'm trying to. We got a question about the Excelsior scholarship. Do you know what the status is on that right now? Are they accepting? We have somebody who's claiming that they're not, that it's on hold. Is that, do you know?
I don't know that to be official, but it wouldn't surprise me since everything's on hold. Only today am I starting to hear some of the private colleges are actually starting to tell students, okay, we're going to be open, come to school in the end of August. So I think the SUNY and CUNY system where that's where the Excelsior program is relevant. I think everything's been put on hold only because they haven't made a decision whether they're going to open up the campus stage again. And I think they're going to have more challenges than private colleges. Private colleges have a little more flexibility.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and now it's set on the website. They're not up yet, so. Thank you.
So continuing on with this theme, what will you do to ensure that continuing education be accessible and available to adults with disabilities?
I referenced that a little bit with my work with the Capitol South Campus Center. That is an adult education program. It's a program that we support through funding to BOCES, Capital Region BOCES. I don't think every district should be responsible for doing this. I think regional approach is better for many different reasons. Regional approach because it can be done in person, but as we're finding out through this conversation, regional approach because it can be done through technology. And providing to make sure that people have the resources to participate, I think is critical. But I don't think we need to be mindful of the fact that, the community of Green Island or Watervliet may not have that program. But if we have a program that serves our Capital Region BOCES footprint, we could actually stretch our dollars appropriately to bring more people under the tent. But we also have to make them aware of it too. Education of the education programs is critical.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And for our last education question, in the past couple of decades, enrollment of students with disabilities in our colleges and universities has increased exponentially. Despite this large increase in disabled enrollment, there has been little to no corresponding increase in funding for disability services centers at our colleges and universities. To correct this inequity, post-secondary students with disabilities are advocating for a $15 million supplemental investment in disability services across SUNY, CUNY, independent colleges, and proprietary colleges. If elected, will you support this effort?
Yes.
And you're on the higher education committee, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so for our next question, do you support or oppose the abolition of involuntary psychiatric commitment and forced psychiatric treatment?
That's a difficult one to say yes or no on. There are individuals I've engaged with in my lifetime. I first of all, no one should have their will imposed against them, all right? Plain and simple. However, there are individuals in very rare circumstances where they are a danger to themselves or a danger to society, all wrapped up into one. And in that situation, which there needs to be a very high litmus test of, we would need to preserve it for that rare circumstance. I'm assuming, because the question's being asked, that this is being probably overutilized, is my fair assumption. But there are individuals many individuals who actually we have to send out of state for treatment because we just don't even have the resources here to do that.
Right. Generally, I think members of our caucus are either strongly opposed to involuntary psychiatric commitment or want to see more money reinvested from savings into home and community-based services.
Well, that I agree with 100%. I agree. And at the same time, life's not absolute. We can't say, I can't honestly say, oh yeah, I 100% oppose this, because there's going to be situations which are just extraordinarily difficult for anybody. I don't care who they are. So that's why I qualify my response with that.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the biggest challenge, of course, has been, and I'm preaching to the choir here, is that, I wasn't around when individuals were being removed from facilities and back in the community. But the comment was, well, technically the resources are to follow. No one's really done the math, but the impression is, because it's the truth, is that the resources haven't fully followed. And that's why we have some challenges today.
Well, and that's the same thing with the downsizing of the juvenile justice system, like, early 2010s and prior a little bit. And that money was supposed to have been, like, the savings from closing some of these, like, facilities, like Tryon, that was supposed to be reinvested into the community to prevent young people from entering the justice system. But, I don't know how widespread that has actually been.
Yeah, well, I think government doesn't do a good enough job of explaining what we do and do not put resources in. I can tell you this, with Raise the Age and many other aspects, we're putting a lot of resources into that, which technically has a similar outcome. We want to make sure that individuals do not become professional members of the prison system and be exposed to worst of the worst, because that's not going to do anything to help change their behavior and change their future.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, people gravitate toward, while the intentions might be good, people often gravitate toward, you know, the latest and greatest trend,
Yeah.
whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Right.
there are so many like community solutions that different communities have implemented that, you know, with funding, you could make them a scalable, you know, replicable model in different parts of the state, like rural solutions, urban, suburban, that kind of thing.
Thank you very much. Now, since you're a member of the Committee on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, we thought that we'd ask you some substance use questions. So our first question is, what can we do to ensure that as many people are trained in Narcan as possible?
So, you know, there's things we've been doing, and I think we build upon those. First of all, basically, if you can't afford Narcan, that's not a barrier. We've established the NCAP program, which is widely publicized. So individuals can come in. Their pharmacists are allowed to write their own orders for patients. So if Zach came in and said, I need Narcan, no questions asked, whether it's for Zach or anybody else. Doesn't matter. I write an order, bill it to the coupon program or his insurance plan, and they walk out with a free Narcan. It's, once again, removing the barriers, expanding access. Same token, there are many programs, Catholic Charities comes to mind, that have been provided many different versions of Narcan, where they go out and do community trainings. And admittedly, you know, the last 3 or 4 months, things have calmed down because of COVID-19, but that's where it works the best. It takes a lot of courage for a mom in Clifton Park to come into a pharmacy and goes and say, I need Narcan because my son is an addict. It takes a lot. They'll do it because they love the child. Same token, these community events where they can almost kind of slide in anonymously, it makes it a little bit easier, and they're giving it for free as well. So I think we need to build upon those programs. We do more education. We've made curriculum changes in the past to talk more about behavioral health and opioid addiction in health classes. And I think that's another way to introduce it to them.
Great, thank you. And in your work in the Assembly, what have you done to expand access to treatment?
So, you know, there's a couple different approaches there, right? First of all, as being the only healthcare professional that's practicing in the legislature, I've been a good, strong advocate and reasoned voice on trying to demystify the myths behind those who struggle with substance abuse. And notice I didn't use the word addiction or addicts. It's substance abuse disorder. Words matter. Approach matters. I've made very clear that this is not something that law enforcement is going to arrest our way out of it and solve the problem. That we need to pay, you know, we talk about the education component, and we've expanded Narcan access to the schools. We've allowed the school nurse to carry it. We've made it more viable in the community, as we talked about. But the other thing we've done is we've listened to families describe their challenges with getting into treatment. And initially, it was all about make sure they have 90 days in a treatment facility outside the area. Because when you have a child who is struggling with addiction, by the time you get to the stage where they need treatment, they've pretty much bankrupted the family financially and emotionally. And they basically say, listen, my Johnny's got a problem. Take him away for 3 months and bring him back the way he used to be when I knew him, which is next to impossible. So what we've done is we've expanded treatment options to give individuals different levels. First of all, just throwing somebody in a facility for 90 days isn't going to work, particularly if it's a young mom who has children. People need to learn to live with their disorder. Just like a patient with diabetes needs to learn to live with diabetes, people with substance abuse disease, struggling with drugs that are addictive, need to learn to live with their disorder because it's a disorder. It's a health issue. It's not a criminal justice issue. And that has been, it sounds crazy, but words do matter. And that has been my mantra since day one. And then we need to support people living a life of recovery. I mentioned earlier about Keith Stack and the pilot program at the Addictions Care Center. It's about peer mentors, peer supporters. Who best to help somebody go through the process than somebody who's done it, who knows the strengths, knows the pitfalls, knows what works, knows what fails. And so we support peer supports. We have peer supports and we have treatment providers available now, thanks to our efforts in the legislature the last several years, at the emergency room, at the beck and call, because we never know when somebody is going to say, I've had it, I need help.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And now we have a question from the caucus related to this topic. We are now well into increased requirements on doctors who prescribe opioids for long-term management of pain. We also have the opioid tax in place. What are you hearing from the community regarding access to adequate pain management with the lawful use of opioids?
So in my practice, I don't hear from the patients because we're absorbing all the problems. What's happened is simple things. Fentanyl used to be readily available as the fentanyl patch, which is used to control long-term pain. The patch you apply once every 3 days, comes in 4 different strengths, 5 different strengths. Well, the opioid tax, basically the pharmacies are picking up the costs. We have declining reimbursement. I don't carry that out on my patients. I've eaten it. I have one little old lady who I've been treating for 10 years with the same prescription. We lose $75 every month on her prescription. We get reimbursed $75 below our cost. I could discharge her and say, geez, I'm sorry, we can't treat you anymore, but I don't have the heart to do it. That being said, I don't know what's happening in other pharmacies. I can tell you other pharmacies are struggling to get opioids to control pain. I can tell you a lot of pharmacies, because the DEA has been really putting significant restrictions and inspections on pharmacies. A lot of them have the choice to say, geez, I'm sorry, I'm not going to carry opioids. They don't want to be a robbery situation. They don't want to be a robbery target, for lack of a better term. And at the end of the day, they don't want to go out of business doing this. So I've heard mostly from the pharmacy community. What's really problematic by the opioid tax, and I was a very vocal critic of this, is that the $100 million we're collecting, $200 million this year, is not going towards treatment and recovery. It's going towards the state budget. And that's not going to get any better now the state budget's looking at a multi-billion-dollar deficit. So I have not seen a ton of patients having access problems because I continue to absorb those costs. Same token, it has presented an opportunity for doctors and pharmacists to have conversations with the patients about looking at alternatives. And sometimes some people will take that the wrong way. Some people say we're taking away my rights. I said, no, you weren't born in this world to be on fentanyl patch for the rest of your life. If there's another cost-effective option that's going to provide you the same as, if not better care, that needs to be done in consultation with your healthcare providers. So it's actually opened up opportunities for that to be addressed. I think mostly you're going to hear from pharmacy owners, and you'll hear from wholesalers who are really stuck with the tax. The manufacturers have avoided the tax in this situation.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And that wraps up our section on substance use. And so we come to the category of leadership. Would you support legislation creating an executive office that coordinates communication between the various disability serving state agencies, similar to the Council on Children and Families that we have now.
I'm kind of disappointed that's not going on already, but I guess I'm going to have to take it from your question that it's not.
It's not, no. But there was a proposed Office of the Advocate, but plans for that were squashed by COVID-19, unfortunately.
Yeah, that effort I have supported in the past, and I would continue to do so.
Great, thank you. And with that, there is one final question that I would like to ask before we open things up to the caucus for maybe anything else. Or wait, actually, no, wait, we have a voting question here. What will you do to ensure people with disabilities have equal access to the fundamental right to vote?
Well, I think we've made some strides in the past in regards to making sure that obviously all sites are ADA accessible, that the voting machines are ADA accessible. I know that we still have much more to do. I know he's probably not on here, but my friend Cliff Perez constantly is on me about adding more opportunities when it comes to ballots, particularly for the blind. So, I would work with my colleagues to continue. I mean, the Assembly overall has been very strong on not only supporting, but also actually passing legislation to expand rights. I firmly believe down the road, we're going to go to an all electronic process, which will open up the opportunities for everybody. And we need to make sure that those with disabilities are not left behind.
Thank you, Assemblymember.
So we have a question from someone watching this. What would somebody do if they were in jail or prison and they weren't being treated fairly? What would you recommend that they do?
It's interesting. I've had people write to me from
Go to sleep.
in my office. It's interesting because since I first came into office in 2013, there was one guy who would write to me about all the unfairness, and we would just respond back to them, and we would reach out to the commissioner and say, hey, there seems to be some validity to this. We want to have you look into it. And sometimes you'd actually get some movement, sometimes you wouldn't. But the interesting part is this past Saturday, I marched in the Black Lives Matter protesting Cohoes. And this guy comes up to me, goes, you know who I am? I said, no, I really don't. He goes, I'm so-and-so. I've been writing to you for the last 6 years. And guess what? Thanks to your efforts, I not only got moved to the different facilities you asked for, that I asked for,
Go to sleep.
but he's actually free now. He's out on parole. So it's kind of good. It's kind of cool because sometimes you don't know the people who've been incarcerated. But, there are organizations. I've worked very closely with many of the Catholic Church ministries that go into Coxsackie and go up to Granville. And they've been very helpful in regards to bringing about individuals' personal plights, but also overall plights with the environment there. And I have to say, as much as everyone's impression of the Department of Corrections, is probably a little bit clouded, the intergov person that I work with has been nothing but professional, follow up, and sincere. And we haven't solved all of those problems, but we've made some great progress.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay, Mike.
Go to sleep. I have to tell my dragon to go to sleep after I unmute myself. So anyway, well, this was great. Once again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, John McDonald, for giving us your time today. This has been fantastic. And we got a lot accomplished here today. And I guess that's about it. We have one more coming up today. So we will take a brief intermission at 7 o'clock. David Soares will be with us, and we can ask him these same questions and see what he has to say as he wants to spend another 4 years doing what he has done so well. So we'll take a break, and for most of us, we'll be back here at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you very much. I
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
the
Thank you,
opportunity. Good night now.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.